Advisory Committee to order, and it's 3:04 in the afternoon, March 10th. Approval of the minutes from February 10th. Those were submitted to everyone. Is there a motion or any corrections on those minutes? Have a motion. Dr. Goetz moves to approve. Second.
I second.
Okay, seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And we were given a copy of the impact fee presentation. I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Atkins so they can go through that and we can see the whole thing. I hope everybody looked at that before our meeting, or certainly be attentive. John,
Yes, sir.
Your show.
Okay, does Michael, city manager, do you want to introduce or say anything before we get started?
No, John, other than we did, and we'll discuss this probably at number 5, John, about our meeting regarding with our presentation last night to the city council.
Yes.
Outside of that, John Atkins, I think we're ready to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. For a level of consistency, I'm going to pass it along to Jeff Whitaker, who's our roadway expert on the project and presented to you the initial information at the last meeting as in a kind of a workshop session. And so there's a level of consistency in the communication. So Jeff, I'm going to now bump it over to you.
Sure. Thanks, John. So this is going to be a continuation of the last meeting. We're going to start this meeting off with just a recap of kind of the last meeting. A lot of times we want to make sure that for anyone who happens to join this call, for those who might have missed a call, just to go over some of the information relatively quickly. We'll dive into the brief summary of the calculations. We'll stop there for a little bit to make sure that everyone's comfortable with the calculations, and then we're going to dive off to any questions the committee might have and any discussions on potential moving forward items. So April, go ahead and go to the next slide. So just to remind everyone where we are in the process, we've done the planning, we've done the land use assumptions and capital improvements plans, we've done some calculating, we've done a lot of the technical elements. Now we're just kicking off some of the policy steps. Actually, the technical elements are still going on, and that's what item 5 will be, the recap of setting the public meeting of last night. But we're right in the middle of the process, and this is kind of where we are going to ask the committee and everyone to kind of roll up their sleeves a little bit more and figure out next steps. So this is the schedule that we had last time. Same schedule we showed last time. Today we're at the impact fee discussions based on some of the comments I heard at the last council meeting during the work session. It sounds like we're going to have the discussion today, and we'll probably have another discussion on the 14th as we tentatively plan for, but it sounds like we're probably going to formulate that and continue moving forward depending on the discussion of today. So this is the recap of the study. We're going to dive into the study. These are the land use assumptions that you already approved. We looked at a 10-year growth projection. There's a 1.3% growth rate. And these are the items that are really the technical analysis that line up with your master plans in the city. Next slide. Water service area. Remember that we can only collect impact fees in the service area, and the money has to be spent within the service area. So wherever you serve water, this is where you serve water, and this is the service area boundary that we had outlined in the assumptions. Wastewater, the next slide, is very similar. A little bit different, but very similar to water and wastewater, just a few highlight different. This is just where people are getting wastewater service. Next slide is roadway. Roadway is different than the other two. We have to divide the city into 3 service areas dictated by state law by a certain size of the service area, and it's limited to the corporate boundaries. So we've outlined 3 service areas for Odessa to consider. And the big thing is what money must be spent in those service areas stays in those service areas. So the capital improvements plans, the city adopted water and wastewater master plans, and these capital improvements plans are reflective of those master plans and are focused on growth. So the water on the top, the wastewater on the bottom. So these are the capital. These are the projects that we're assuming that makes up the impact fee study. And roadway, very similar to water and wastewater. There are 3 different service area maps. And the important thing to remember about each of these projects is, as we were going through the capital improvement planning, we put the full cost. When we get into the analysis section, we break that cost down to 3 components: existing, 10-year growth, and future growth. So these are the roadway projects that are in the transportation master plan, as well as what we're anticipating to be needed to serve future growth. Next slide. If you recall, last time we spent the bulk of the time talking about the formula. What is the math behind the impact fee? If you recall, we start with a large CIP. If you look at the previous slides for the water and wastewater, the water CIP is in today's dollars is 55 million, and the wastewater is 89 million. When we look at the total recoverable costs, what percent of that is attributable to growth? It comes down roughly to 10% of that. So really what we're looking at assessing to growth is 5.1 million and 10 million. We discussed last time, whenever you buy any large capital project, most of the time it's financed. Similar to buying your house, you're paying debt service on that. So we included financing costs into that. But we also knew that as you're financing it, you do earn interest on the money that you're saving. So we have interest earnings there. So if you look at the total recoverable cost, will be the total recoverable cost plus the financing costs minus the interest earnings to get you to that $6.6 million or the $12 million. So that's the really important number on here, is the total recoverable cost. We'll talk about the credit for ad valorem taxes. That's basically the credit for ad valorem taxes is when a development comes in, they start paying taxes. So we actually account for the future taxes that growth will pay. So we subtract that out. So the bottom number that's highlighted in yellow, that's really the heart of our study, is that 5.9 million and 10.8 million. That is the numerator. That's the cost. That's what we're assuming is going to be passed on to the maximum that can be passed on to future development. Then we divide by the growth, which is the service units. So the service units are listed above. If you recall, the water and wastewater service areas are slightly different. So there's slightly different service units for the water and wastewater, mainly that there's less people on wastewater service than there are water. So when you divide those out, $778 is for a 3/4 inch base meter and $1,662 for a 3/4 inch base meter. So the summary of our report, all the technical analysis for water and wastewater is summarized on this table. And the real takeaway, the real item when you actually recommend the report for consideration, is the maximum fee. This last line is really what we're really the sole purpose of the impact fee studies, to determine, you know, what that cost for growth per that base meter is. Very similar on roadway. We have a very similar calculation on roadway. Follows the same pattern. We look at the total CIP cost. We look at that recoverable cost, which is what we need in the next 10 years. We add the finance and interest earnings. We look at the credit for ad valorem taxes. And so for service area 1, which was, I'll highlight service area 1, but all the service areas would be similar. 69 million. The total recoverable, that's 28.5 million. Slightly different. Our service units are different. We converted those to vehicle miles. We talked a lot about how we made that conversion to vehicle miles. The formula, 28 million divided by 10,000 vehicle miles. So the bottom number is similar to water and wastewater. That's the goal of what we're trying to develop with the impact fee study. So at the end of the day, the impact fee study, there's really 3 portions of an impact fee study. The first portion was those assumptions that you approved with the growth rate and the capital improvement plans. The second portion, if you will, is these maps, these charts right here that we just went over. And then the third portion is the recommendation on the policy. So we've kind of done the first portion so far. We're reintroducing the second portion right now, and we're going to start diving into the third portion a little bit today, as much as we desire to. So we're kind of reviewing the second portion right now. So just to summarize that up, this is the one table. If you ask me, you know, what am I supposed to really take away from the impact fee study? This is kind of the summary. This is the executive summary. This is the summary of the fees that we've calculated. You know, for water and wastewater, it's $1. A little bit easier for roadway. Each 3 service areas mapped out with their cost per vehicle mile. So this is kind of the one slider. With that, we wanted to take a second to stop and have a little bit of discussion. If anyone, I know y'all have had the report. You had the introduction last time. We did a quick recap now. Wanted to see if there's any discussion from the committee members of any clarifications on the study, the calculations before we actually dived into, actually probably the practical side of, what is the rate that a person will actually pay, kind of the policy side. Wanted to kind of, if you will, make sure everyone was clear on like what the report says before we really start diving into what the policy discussions might be.
Anybody have any questions before we move forward?
No, not at this point. I don't.
Okay,
Great.
yeah, Jeff, let's move on.
Awesome. I always want to show things once or twice because it takes a while to a lot of information getting at you. So we'll move on to the impact fee discussion. April, if you, this is the recap of the service area. So really what we're asking at the end of the day, if you think of that chart that we showed you, is what this body is really looking at making a recommendation for is what are the numbers they're actually filling out there. If you go back to the previous slide, April, these are the caps. You can't go above these caps. But what do the numbers need to be? And we're going to talk a little bit about process of how to get there. So we're trying to fill in the same table with this being the caps. This is really the parameters we give. So at the end of the day, much like I said, that's the summary. This is the summary that we'll fill in. So the next slide, next slide, April. I just wanted to walk you through Midland slide because I thought it'd be helpful to understand the thought process behind their Capital Improvements Advisory Committee and how they came to their rates. So this is the actual rates that they're charging. So if you will, they have 4 service areas. You only have 3, so it's slightly different. So the way they filled in their 4 service areas, it was a fairly simplistic approach. It took a lot of time and a lot of discussion to get there. But really what they did is they took that calculated impact fee, they cut it in half. So when you look at water and wastewater, that's 50%. They cut it in half and they chose to adopt it by state law. They had to do that because they didn't go through that financial calculation that we went through the ad valorem tax credit, but they chose on water and wastewater to adopt a 50% maximum fee. They did the same thing on roadway. So if you look at Midland's philosophy that they took on their calculation, they basically adopted 50% of the rates that they calculated from the study. A little simplified, but that's basically what they did. The one exception to that is in their ordinance, they built in a residential reduced rate at 25%, but I'll clarify residential reduced rate at 25% was only for single family townhomes and duplexes, not apartments or other types. It was just, if you read their ordinance, they took a reduced rate at 25%. So basically when you calculate the resident at 50%, they took a 25% reduction off of that. So this is, if you want to dive into, there's a lot of good information on Midland's impact fee, and there's a lot of discussion to get there. This is where we ended up with that Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. And we ended that by asking a lot of questions, working through a lot of different details, but this is just a highlight of where they ended up through their process.
Hey,
Jeff,
Jeff.
are you saying the numbers that you're showing are that 50%?
Correct. This is the numbers that they adopted. Now this isn't cost per single family house. I'll have to convert that for you. This is the cost per the 3/4 inch meter and the cost per vehicle mile, but this is the rate that the city of Midland adopted.
Jeff, the residential though is then 25% off of say the 1656. Is that correct, or is it 25% off a different number?
No, it's 25% off these numbers. That's a
Okay.
very good question. It was a 25% reduction off of these numbers. It's a little confusing when you start talking about percentages, but they basically give a 25% discount to these numbers.
Okay.
Jeff, go back to our
Maximum.
Yep.
our maximum.
Yep.
Yes.
I can't believe that we can do all of our water improvement for $778 per 3/4 inch meter, and Midland's is $3,600.
No, 1600.
No.
Well, they were 30. Yeah, you're right. They did half. You're right.
It'd be 3,200, yeah.
Yeah, 32.
3,400.
Yeah, 32, 3,300, whatever it is.
Yeah. Wow.
Let me respond to that then.
Because some doesn't seem right, John Atkins. I'm not challenging your numbers,
Well,
your professionalism, but
Yeah.
Something's
Hey,
crazy.
John, I thought in our last meeting, our numbers were quite a bit larger than Midland's. That's what our max was at that time,
There,
wasn't it?
Yes.
you'll see as we move forward, here in a little bit, we'll show you some of those comparative charts. And what you'll see is the roadway maximum numbers are significant compared to Midland's numbers. That's the big difference. So to come back to y'all's question with regards to the maximum numbers you see for the water in Odessa appearing to be significantly lower, which the math is, yes. We took a fairly conservative approach to the infrastructure that is shown to be built to serve future development in y'all's master plan. And what I mean by that is the infrastructure that's proposed would get those areas of town to build out, which could be 50 years from now or so. And we're only looking at being able to recover 10 years worth of dollars associated with that. So what I don't know, because I didn't do the water and wastewater portion of Midlands, is the infrastructure that they may have proposed may only have been to serve a shorter period of time. Therefore, they can recover a much larger dollar amount than what we are showing in our study.
Okay.
And John,
Well, then what we would do, I'm sorry, Jeff, but what we would do is then 10 years from now, we would redo impact fees, then 10 years, then 10. So we would
Yeah.
5 times to get the 50 years is what you're saying, John Atkins?
Yes, sir. You're right. There'll be a whole lot of dollars. And you have to do the update. If you move forward and do this, you do the update every 5 years. So it becomes a moving 5-year window when you then continue to recover more of the capital project costs that might happen in the next 10. You can then recover more of that in the next 10-year window and more of that in the next 10-year window. It just happens in 5-year increments. So we're in the what we call the 2020 to 2030 window right now. The city will need to look at this again in 2025, and the new window will be 2025 to 2035. And you'll be able to go grab dollars that are beyond the 2030 window and pull into this cost and recover that cost.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
Keep. I'm sorry, Jeff.
yeah, I think the only thing, the two difference in Midland, and this slide, I think the next slide, I don't remember if I actually got the two differences in Midland. Is Midland had a few debt projects on there that have existing projects. So while in Odessa, I believe we're looking only on the future. And the second thing is their base meter is actually a 1-inch meter, not a 3/4 inch meter. So that does change the calculation slightly. Would probably up the cost on Midland slightly per the base unit. Those are just two anecdotal things that I know, and April's already making that change. I didn't notice it was on there, but their base meter for residential is 1 inch. So it's a slightly different calculation.
the one other comment that I'd like to make is the one thing that Odessa has done years ago was be fairly proactive in the amount of capacity that has been built into the treatment facilities for the city, both the water treatment plants and the wastewater treatment plant. So from a pure capacity standpoint, those facilities are fairly large. And due to the fact that they were built quite a few years ago, we had chosen not to include dollars of when those were originally built into these calculations. We chose to just place projects that are for future development that haven't been built yet. So could there be some potential recoverable costs within those treatment facilities? That could be argued. The fact is they haven't been built very recently, that it was hard to argue that case that those facilities were built for and to be recovered. Those dollars, which have been, probably the debt has been closed out on many years ago, would justify future development paying for those treatment facilities today. So
Hey,
those
John, I think I can help you understand that a little bit better. Midland is going through a large water servicing, building out their facility, and so they're including that cost where we did that several years ago. They've always been behind us on water and wastewater. And the reason their per unit mile is different is because they did that $100 million bond not too long ago to do their roads, and obviously that's probably not included in there, and we haven't done that.
Yeah,
that's my guess.
That's a reasonable big picture comment.
And
I would agree with you.
And one thing I'll let you know is that, we a lot of times tackle the discussions by topic. So Midland chose to do the same strategy for water, wastewater, and roadway. They took 50% and they give a 25% discount to residential. You could change your strategy on water, wastewater, and roadway differently. You don't have to do the same strategy on each. So you might look at these and say, you know what, those water and wastewater seem pretty reasonable. We're going to adopt this number that we see right here, or recommend this number right here. So you don't have to do the exact same strategy like Midland did on all three of them. You could do something different for water, something different for wastewater, and something different for roadway. So just keep that in mind. A lot of times when we have the discussions, what we'll have, and we have a lot of material planned for you to help answer questions. So a lot of our discussion today was really to help facilitate the discussion, educate, and talk about what ifs with this group, and kind of get some of the answers to the questions. So one of the things I thought I'd do, open up to the committee and see if y'all had questions and wanted to go through things. If not, we can propose some thoughtful questions for y'all to answer and kind of start getting your input back.
Jeff, let me give you, what if Odessa's service units were 1-inch meters? What would those numbers be differently so we could compare apples and apples?
Sure.
Because quite frankly, I think we need to be comparing Midland, because that's our competition on any new subdivision, any new housing project, new industrial, whatever. The site people are usually looking at both communities. So,
Yep.
John, I totally agree with you, John. Did we use mostly 3/4 meters?
That was, are you asking John Landgraf? Sorry.
no,
I'm asking either one of you.
I think Tom Curry can best answer that for us, or Vaughn.
Three-quarter, this Tom Kerr, sorry. A 3/4 inch meter is our base meter, or smallest meter that we do set, and they are common. We do have both 3/4 and 1-inch meters, so there are probably more 1-inch that are going out now than used to, but to the 3/4 is the smallest base meter we have.
All right, then we need John Landgraf. I agree totally with you. We need to look at the 1-inch meter, because that's the one we're using more prevalently now.
If you look at the chart here, so what was our 778 was our number, I think, max number?
Yeah.
So 78 times 1.67. So $1,300 would be if you came in and got a 1-inch meter in Odessa at the maximum. Well, there's the charge. It's written there.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
And then 2,700 for sewer.
Correct. So that's if you an apples to apples to their 1-inch meter. There you go. That's a better way to compare. So water 1297, wastewater 2770. So let's jump back real quick. April. So to Odessa, to Midland's number, sorry. So theirs is 1656 and 838.
Times 2.
Yeah, if I total those, 1656 plus 838, that's 2494. So if you did Odessa's totaled together, which is what people are going to pay, they're going to pay if they're going to come in and get a water meter, they're getting wastewater service more than likely too.
John
So-
Atkins, we need to double Midlands though. Remember to get,
Yeah, that's what he's doing that.
oh, okay.
Let me finish this. Okay, 27700. So that's 4,000.
About $400 difference, best I can tell.
Yeah, Odessa's would be actually close to $4,000 for adding up water and wastewater for a 1-inch meter.
And Midlands would be about 4,800.
Yeah.
Yeah, before the 50% discount that they're, or the credit they're giving them.
Before the 50% discount. Yeah, so they're actually fairly comparable. Right. The $400 difference, I guess, is what you said. Yeah, you're correct.
Okay, I just want to just apples and apples, and I
No,
think we're there. So
That's a good question.
thank you.
Mr. Landgraf, if I could ask a question to the folks at Kimley Horn. Jeff, when you were going through with this process through Midland, and they came to the conclusion that they were going to reduce that by half, what precipitated that conversation? Was it, developers won't support that, or there'd be too much outcry, or what was the impetus to go and cut that, and then follow that up with what was also the reasoning behind the additional 25% on the residential?
Sure, absolutely. April, do you mind going back to the fee calculation for any of the slides? I think that will help me explain it. So the emphasis behind the 50% credit calculation was that state law, the actual maximum fee calculation slide. The emphasis behind that is state law requires you to do the ad valorem tax credit. If you don't do the ad valorem tax credit, legally Midland can't charge over 50%.
One more
So
slide.
the actual calculation, trying to show it. Yeah. So if you see this credit for ad valorem taxes right here,
Uh-huh.
in the state law says you could do this calculation for ad valorem taxes, or you could just cut it in half if you don't want to go through the exercise. Well, in Midland, they didn't do that calculation, so they were actually capped at the 50% mark. So it was a very, very simple conversation with them that legally they couldn't charge more than 50%. And so Midland said, let's charge the 50%. So that was actually their cap. While in Odessa, our cap is much less. The actual ad valorem taxes that Future Growth pays is not 50%. So we actually did that calculation in here. So the emphasis behind that was their ceiling, if you will. Their ceiling, they could actually not charge over 50% by law. That's just the way the Chapter 395 is written.
So essentially, by default, they had to go to 50%.
Right. So it made somewhat of an easy conversation. When they looked at the 50% numbers, they felt like they were reasonable, and they started doing comparisons. So there was a lot of discussion. Really, the big discussion was about residential. And maybe the fact of our Capital Improvements Advisory Committee was made up of an architect that was primarily residential, some real estate representatives. And so they were focused hyperly on residential and affordability. And there was discussion back and forth between the various, and they felt like they wanted to incentivize or discount single family and affordability. So the 25% discount was kind of the agreement between the various members of the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. If you read their ordinance, it actually states that 25% discount ends, I think, at 5 years. Or it's either 3 or 5 years. I have to read it, but it's basically when you have to update again anyway. So the discussion would come around again, but there was supposed to be a limited discount to allow kind of a phased-in approach to residential.
So, Jeff, this is Tom Kerr. So if we were looking at that, the 6,685,000 figure,
Right.
at that point, Midland automatically has to reduce theirs by half. because they don't do the credit for ad valorem. Is that right?
That's correct. Instead of reducing it by 775,000, they cut it by 3.3 million.
So that was their maximum.
That's correct.
Thank you, Jeff.
Those are great questions, Michael and John. Any other questions? And we got some questions we can ask you. We have, if you remember the bar charts that we showed you last time, we have the ability to test scenarios and answer questions about the different comparisons we showed you before, so on the fly. So we're open to have questions. If not, we have various questions for y'all we can get feedback on.
Hey, Jeff, by chance, did Midland have any discussions with any of their developers or home builders or any of this prior to going through their process?
I would say formally, so our advisory committee was made up of 4 representatives from the development community, similar to, I think this advisory has representatives at. They were invited to the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. There's a few of them. We had them in the basement of Midland in their pre-council meeting chambers, if you've been there. So we had some of the development community show up just to listen. They were invited to, we had a council work session similar to what we had in Odessa, and they were invited to that just to hear. But largely the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee, I guess, spread the message. There was never a formal like meeting in Midland that I attended, at least, discussing it with them. Now, staff probably had some conversations, or maybe the advisory committee had some conversations, but there wasn't a formal one-on-one presentation or discussion.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, this is Michael. That's something that actually we, as a committee, need to discuss, and we'll discuss that at number 5.
Okay.
We've got some direction from council, so
Okay.
I think Mr. Landgraf's thinking the same thing, that this is something that we, as a committee, need to discuss and figure out how we're going to do that, because
Okay.
anyway, we'll discuss that at 5.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that Midland didn't talk to the folks, because I think there was council representatives that attended some of the CIC meetings, not to have a quorum, but they were talking to people. So there was a lot of several meetings back and forth with a lot of questions coming from developers, and I think we were answering the questions to them, just maybe not in a formal setting. I will say that we've done impact fees, across the state. And most communities that are adopting a new impact fee have some sort of outreach to the development community through the process. If it's an update, they don't typically, because they've already had them. They're just going through the update process. But on a new fee, they typically do. So
let's talk about that after we kind of go through all these
Sure.
questions.
Sure.
Mike, 'cause I think there's a lot of people have the same concerns you do, Mr. Withrow. Jeff, why don't you go through y'all's questions, since y'all done this so many times? We may not be asking the right questions or know what to ask, so your stimulus there would be well received.
Sure. Typically, our first question is kind of a general pulse of the committee, and we typically try to get the feel of just not necessarily numbers about water, wastewater, and roadway. We typically walk around and say, hey, and I'll highlight the questions we're going to ask so that you kind of are aware of them. A lot of times we'll ask, like, normally the question is, which one of these do you think is the most important for Odessa at this time? It may be all 3. What's the least important? And kind of just a general feel of how you feel about water, wastewater, and roadway impact fees in a whole. And then after that, we'll dive into kind of a lot of like non-residential or residential. What do you think about non-residential or residential? Like, should they be treated the same or differently? Just high level, no recommendations. And we start diving into some high level discussion of just kind of the pulse of the committee. And then we can start diving. And once we understand the pulse, we can start diving into some of those refined details. So I guess I'll open the first question of what are y'all's thoughts about water and wastewater roadway impacts at this point?
Jeff, let me ask before I answer that. When is the impact fee? And we have a little bit different. We've got a mix in our community. We have some national home builders, some regional home builders, some local home builders, and we have developers that develop and never build anything, that just develop lots and sell lots. We have the national home builders that are developing their own lots and then building. So when and who pays that impact fee? At what point is that due and payable to the city?
So it's due and payable. I'm assuming that there's no infrastructure being built by the developer that's getting credit received. If a developer builds infrastructure like on the thoroughfare plan, he will receive value for that.
Right.
But in the case that they don't, it's due at the time of building permit.
Okay, the building permit. So
Correct.
that's who's going to pay it. Okay, John Burnett's going to pay it, not Larry Lee who builds the lot. It's the guy that gets the building permit for the house or the shopping center or whatever.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. I just want everybody to understand when that gets applied, because I've had multiple people ask me that question that have heard about this in the community, and it'll affect different developers and different people in different ways. So that's important to understand.
If a developer was to build a road, say like they're building Fodry Road and it's on the capital improvement plan, they can apply for credits. And, you know, even though they may be a developer, their builder would benefit because their builder would get there wouldn't be an impact fee due because they would have a bank at the city, if you will. Like if that road was worth $100, they would have $100 bank at the city that they'll draw from. And so they're paying the impact fee. They're paying that as part of infrastructure.
So Jeff, this time again, sorry, real quick, but on the water and wastewater, that's paid when the meter is taken. Is that
That's
right?
correct. Sorry. Yeah. At the time you get the meter, you have to pull the tap.
Which is usually very close to the same time you're pulling your
Building
building
permit. Yep.
Yeah, it's usually by the same person anyway. I mean, it's the same. The other question, Tom Kerr and Jeff, would we still continue to have our developer and city participation for overwidth pavement and oversized utility lines? How would that program be impacted by the impact fees?
So Jeff can probably give you the best answer because he's more experienced with it. But yes, John, I think that still stays in place. And so the credit I think that Jeff is talking about would be the overwidth amounts and that type of thing. And
then that would go as a reduction to the impact fee due.
Yes, sir. That's what I understand. Yeah, Jeff,
that's generally correct. I mean, in most cases.
Okay.
Jeff, is that how they treated it over in Midland?
I have to research Midland a little bit to see exactly how they were treated that, but generally speaking, the answer is if they're adding the extra capacity and they're paying for it and it's on the capital improvement plan, they would have to receive credit by state law. So I assume that they're treating it that way.
Okay.
Michael, I can answer that on a D.R. Horton project over there. The city required them to build mid-KIF, half the width of mid-KIF, and then they credited them towards their impact fee for what it cost them to build mid-KIF. So I think the answer to that is yes.
Thank you, John.
Okay, go. I will answer. Obviously, we have a lot of capital improvement needs in the city of Odessa, especially looking forward 10 years and beyond. I think these impact fees are another tool in the toolbox on way to fund things. We have a water and sewer fund that historically has done a lot of that. We've done a lot of it by certificates of obligation. We've done it with capital bonds in the past. We've done it in many ways, as Dr. Goetz and Filberto understand. This is just another way to do that. I don't know that our numbers, when you compare apples and apples with Midland, our numbers are not out of line with what their numbers are. we need to be careful and so that we maintain a competitive edge or certainly are competitive. But I think the impact fee is something that gives us the ability to continue to grow in a way that we spread that load of financing out in the areas where that growth is, going to occur.
John, to a degree, I agree, but our impact on roadway is far different than Midland. We're
You're
twice
right.
as high.
Yeah, twice as high. Go ahead, Jimmy. You've got a lot of history here.
Well, we have done this in different ways, and you went over them all. I thought that was a really good conversation, so I didn't have a whole lot more to say. I'm just saying that there is no way that we can have impact fees, whether it's water, wastewater, or roadway, that is a larger figure than Midland, because Midland is our competition, and I think there's several of us that are on this committee that knows that people will build over there instead of over here if it's $1.
You kind of hit my third question there that I was going to ask. Are there any other people on the committee that would like to share their general thoughts on impact fees?
Well, I think we all know we need something, but I think the hardest part is going to be coming up with that particular something that still, I'm in the title insurance business, and I'm one of these guys that I see things happening, and I see people going to Midland, and we got to figure out how to way to retain that growth and those people, or otherwise we're kind of defeating the whole purpose. So I think our impact fees are going to have to be explored and discussed, but definitely the fact that Midland's consideration has an advantage even at 50% over us right now, just because of, I don't know. I don't know why, but people are going to Midland. So I think we've got to remember that also.
I'd like for some of the other folks to talk.
Yeah, Richard, Joe, Reverend, anybody have any other thoughts or ideas, comments?
I believe, this Richard, I think we really need to be competitive with Midland, at least be a little bit below whatever we can do to get to attract builders and developers. But the road impact is higher, much higher here, but didn't Midland do that bond for their roads?
So they did $100 million bond. Yes.
Yeah.
And this is Tom Kirky, I'm sorry. And I think one thing that may also be shaping that a little bit is our road impact fee that you're looking at does not have the 50% reduction that Midland did. So, this is before you would have done a 50% reduction if you were to apply.
April, can you go back to the Midland one right quick, if you don't mind? Okay.
Even at that, it's less.
Yeah, it's quite a bit less.
Yeah, I think just anecdotally is that y'all have some pretty major projects, especially in the
Right.
northeast part of
town.
that are really expensive, and so that I think that's driving, especially that one high service area up quite a bit. Is you got Midland didn't have quite the roadway needs in certain sections of the city that y'all have.
And that really is what drives the cost of the roadway impact, is our need versus their need. And we just simply have higher need, right, Jeff?
Yes, I mean, if you look at Midland, they had if you look at like they're a lot more they have less developed areas. Their issue is that they don't have that. They're running out of land more than maybe you guys are as you expand the area. So they have roads that expand out there, but y'all have more needs of the arterial roads that span out into the areas of the town that need to serve the next 10 to 20, 50 years, as John Atkins was saying.
Jeff, should we move towards a comparative chart of some sort and talk
Yeah.
about?
As we pull up the comparative chart, I heard a lot of folks say, comparative to Midland. So sometimes what we suggest to do, and this is an open discussion, is would it be helpful for the committee to see different options as we get through, maybe showing Midland what Midland is, what Midland would be minus 10% or so. We're trying to come up with ideas to show y'all kind of, hey, this is kind of a starting point for a recommendation, so we can have that discussion. But we have these charts. This is the single family comparison in Midland that we showed you last time, but we have this in Excel and we can play with the charts. I'm hearing a lot of Midland. So this is the average in Midland. Midland has a different fee depending on where you're on the city because the roadway fee changes a little bit. So this is the average fee in Midland.
Okay, and this
the
is,
highest or lowest.
Jeff, and this is the fee at 50% for Midland, and
Correct.
what's shown for Odessa is the full fee, correct?
That's correct. Yep, that's correct.
Jeff, does it include the 25% discount for residential or not?
No, it's
For the single family detached housing, then they had their half fee and then you got a 25% discount on it, right?
Correct.
Is that included in the 5,114?
I
don't think so, Jeff.
I don't believe so. I believe that is their before discount.
Okay, all right. Just as long as we understand apples and apples, I appreciate that. So our numbers 1, 2, and 3 include obviously the 3 paving roadway, which are our big numbers, and that's why this looks so distorted.
Yeah, when you look at your water and wastewater, the numbers kind of close to the same as I think John mentioned.
Yes, and they're close to the same on the chart also.
Yeah, and realize
What I'd like to do, John and Jeff, is this chart's great, but this chart's awkward. So we need to have it to where our water and wastewater is one deal and our roadways a different deal. I think that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have water and wastewater as an impact fee and roadway as an impact fee.
as far as illustrating
look at it,
comparisons.
Yeah.
And that's fine. We can do that.
So if we were to take all 3 of our areas, total them up and divide them by half, we're going to be pushing about 13 grand. Am I seeing that correct or? Okay.
April,
Gotcha.
you just cut roadway by half.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's if we, yeah.
Do we have the average of all 3 of our areas and how that compares?
So is that the numbers 10, 36?
No, I guess that was it. Okay, I'm sorry, April. Can you go back to the chart that has them cut in half?
Yes.
Yeah, if you average service areas 1, 2, and 3, just by that, you're looking at 6,500.
6,500. And that's in
Across.
service area of 1, 2, and 3. And so the average is 65. Is that what you said, John?
Yeah, if you said, you know something, let's just make this
Yeah.
the number the same across the entire city. Yeah, and you wanted to average the 3 areas, 6,500 be the total.
No. Can't be. The highest one's not but 6480.
Yeah, she cut those in half, John.
Oh, okay. What's the average of the halves there? The 3 halves.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, John. That's what I was looking for.
I've
I
got
show-
just below 5,500,
I got
5,460, 470, 5,470.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
we
5470.
yeah.
Yes, we're still higher than Midland, but not much.
Yeah. Yeah, the unique thing is we can slice this a lot of different ways, and we'll be happy to work, and that's part of this. This is, we've gotten all the way to here, and this is the hard part now.
Well, I think we're gonna have to separate our roads out and calculate that separately, because, I mean, we're not gonna be able to get even close to competitive if we leave it as an average, I don't think.
And Mike, we can pull the numbers in whatever direction you want. Let's if you looked at Midlands right now, I know we didn't. I'll give you the reason why we didn't show all 4 of Midland service areas. It's just so the chart wouldn't just be crammed full of numbers.
And theirs is an average, correct?
It's an average of the whole. Yeah, it took all 4 of their service areas and averaged them into one bar chart, just so we could compare other cities besides just Midland.
John Atkins, and I'm not advocating this by any means, but I'm just asking.
Sure.
Could we charge the same for roadway in all 3 areas? Or are we bound because they are distinct areas to have a unique number for each area?
You can charge, as long as you do not exceed your maximum for water, wastewater, and roadway, you can vary that fee to whatever you want.
The only disadvantage to doing that is that money that's charged in that area has to be spent in that area. So you'd be punishing the higher one, area 1, if you charge the area 2 rate. I'm making up stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was a big decision. And one of the questions we talked about, and you hit a lot of the questions you go there. One of the questions we always ask on roadways, do you want to charge a flat percentage across the areas? Like Midland took that 50% and they charged that, or sometimes we call it a flat rate. So by rate, I mean like $2,000 a house, or, the same dollar amount because you can just mess with the percentages to get them all the same. But so every committee has a different perspective. Some say with the percentage, you're treating every area the same percentage wise. And then other ones say, hey, we're treating everyone the same by dollar amount, but you are, not every service area has the same needs as every other service area, is what you were saying.
Right.
Some have more
Right.
needs than others. So for example, Fort Worth took the approach of they charge $37.50 a house per roadway, no matter where you are in the city. That's what they charge. That's their rate. Lubbock and Midland both took that percentage. Both of them took a percentage approach.
Eventually, it's going to come down to a number. So whether you calculate it based on a percentage, or you just go, you know something, I want service area 1 to be $6,000, and let's max out what the water and wastewater is, and let's cut roadway to get down to the 6,000. That's an example of what you could do.
Yeah, I'll give the example just because I worked just to give you what other capital improvements advisory committees in the city of College Station. That's the recommendation from the capital improvements advisory committee was we want an impact fee of $5,000. This is their real recommendation. And then they worked with, once they came up with that recommendation, they end up working their roadway, water, and wastewater to equal 5,000. So they actually figured out what they wanted, then they kind of backed into the numbers, all within the maximum legal fee. But that was just an example, like John was saying, of a real city that did it that way.
They work backwards, and that way it stays simpler.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's kind of what, John, you're saying, and Mike, we're all kind of saying the same thing.
Yeah, I agree.
We feel like we've got to be below Midland, and I think this group, Tom Kerr and Mike and all of us, we need to come up with a number that we can live with as a city and that we can sell to developers.
Jimmy, this is Michael. We can certainly look at options. I mean, the reality is the needs are the needs, and I get that. I also recognize, and I think all of you are right. I mean, we don't want to position ourselves where we're not competitive. And I think that overall, that should be the goal. I think if you ask this council, they would say the same thing. But if we're looking for us to come back with an additional recommendation on how we can work the numbers, where I think it meets all of our needs, we can certainly look at that.
The one thing we could, if it's, hey, let's focus on comparing to Midland, the one thing we could do is easily take the other cities off this chart, put all 4 of Midland's service areas on here, and you can then compare Odessa's 3 service area to Midland's 4 service areas, if you'd like. And it would give you the whole picture between the 2 communities.
Yeah, John, I think that would have the net effect of showing us if there's one area, and I'm guessing it's going to be area 1, that would clearly show that there's a lot more need in area 1 than there is in 2. And if we compare that to Midland, we can see where the larger need was in the Midlands areas versus our areas.
Right.
Yep, John, I like that approach. I think this chart has served its needs. It showed us what some of the other communities were doing, which is what we ask you for.
Right.
Now that we know about Waco's and the Dentons and the Lubbocks of the world, we need to focus on what Midland's doing. So I like the idea of spreading out Midland, and like Michael was saying, then we can look at our hot spots versus their hot spots.
Sure.
And their old part of town and our old part of town, and we'll have a much better understanding.
Yeah.
A little bit more work on your part, but hopefully not much.
Mr. Chairman, I would advocate that we leave Denton in there. That way people can see how bad it can be.
That sounds like a city manager.
You're getting to be quite the politician.
That sounds like a city manager, doesn't it?
I will tell you that is Denton's maximums. They charged their maximums across the board.
On the water and wastewater.
On water, wastewater, yeah. I apologize.
And I was told the other day by a nationwide developer that Frisco charges the maximum on everything, and they said, if you don't want to live here, it's okay.
Well, it's not quite the maximum, John. We did those 2.
Okay,
But
but it's pretty big numbers, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty big numbers. Yep. And the reason Dentons are so big is they have treatment plants they're paying for, but they also have ownership in the Lake Louisville and Lake Ray Roberts portions, and that debt service on those lakes is significant. So if you wonder why their water and wastewater bars are so huge.
Well, Dr. Goetz can explain our debt services and our water rates, but we don't need
Right.
to.
That's all in our water road.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
That's why Lubbock doesn't have anything on there.
Right.
Any
other questions that you want to ask us, Jeff, or put on the table for us to consider?
The typical questions are, and I'll just recap them. We've talked a little bit about our appetite. We talked a little bit about percentage and flat rate, which I think you'll see the needs. The other question is really about, is there any land use? Typically, we talk about residential versus non-residential. Do we want to look at how, like we mentioned, we're showing Midlands without the discount. This is just showing that. Do we want to explore anything on that as we develop these? I mean, obviously, we can put these updated slides with and without the discount for the residential. It's really the only other question, I think, to get us the direction so we can show y'all and have the materials y'all need to make a decision and work towards a recommendation.
Yeah, Jeff, we need all that.
Yeah.
Can we flip over to the one that shows 50% on Odessa, just that April had a minute ago, I think? Wasn't there one that showed that a minute ago, I thought?
Yeah, this is actually attached to a spreadsheet, so she has to update the spreadsheet and it automatically
Oh, okay, I'm
updates.
sorry.
But no, she's doing it right now. It'll just take a second before it refreshes.
Yes. So we want 50% for all 3 or only roadway?
You'd shown 50% on all 3. I know I can calculate, but I'm just trying to get an average of, I think the average would be, at 50% would be about $4,200. If we did
No,
50%.
I think Tom said 55 or something like that. I don't know. We could.
So this
Really?
is
What-
50%.
What's
What
on
did
the
you-
screen is 50%
Well, if you
of
got,
all of
okay,
them.
if you take all 3 of those, correct, would add them up and divide it by 3?
Yes.
So you're looking at 7, 12,
No, it's
maybe
close.
14 or 13,000 divided by 3.
Yeah, that's closer to 4,600. Yeah.
Yeah, 40.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
And in April, you just reduced did you go across the board or did you just reduce roadway by 50%?
I went across the board.
She went across the board.
That's
Oh,
that's 4250 average.
Yeah, that's what I was saying is right at 4250 when I was calculating a minute
yeah,
ago.
you're right. You're right.
Yeah. Okay. That helps me.
And the other nuance in this, if I'm going to complicate things, but it was a great question earlier, is keep in mind the water and wastewater base meter calculation is just a 3/4 inch. And of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah,
Two-
being in the
Oh, that's
plumbing
right.
business, more people going towards 1 inch.
yeah, and
Yeah,
we
that's
did when we did Frisco's, they converted not this past year when we did it, but 5 years ago when we did it, then they converted from 3/4 to 1 inch. So there
I
are,
thought we talked about it a few minutes ago, and we said to compare 1 inch to 1 inch.
Well, but Midland was really 1 inch, but all our numbers were 3/4, I think, Jimmy.
And
So-
I thought she changed it to 1 inch.
But I
no,
think is the 51,114 or 5114, is that based on 1 inch on Midland?
yes.
Okay.
Let's do this then. Let's get Odessa's updated to 1 inch and not, but not now. You can send this to us, John, Jeff, and
Okay.
April. 1 inch,
Okay.
so we can compare to Midland. We can drop out Denton, Waco, and Lubbock.
Okay.
And then we want to look at all 3 Odessa areas and all 4 Midland areas.
All right.
And then we need to, since Midland is already at 50%, I think just for comparison committee, let's look at Odessa at 1 inch and 50%. Golly, she's gonna do that right now.
How about if we do, John, what if we were to do Odessa at 100%, Midland at 100% on one page, and then go ahead and do the 50-50, and then we may have to adjust
Yes,
accordingly in the road somewhere.
yeah, that's where I was gonna get to.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry.
No,
I'll leave you alone.
I mean, ultimately, that's where what we need to look at. I agree.
And then don't forget that Midland's doing 25% off residential.
Oh, yes, definitely. I
Yeah,
think
we've
that's,
got we've got charts for the non-residential that we didn't even broach yet as far as comparisons, but
okay.
I think the 1 inch comparison is a really good idea. We'll still have a calculation for 3/4 inch because we've never said that people can't have a 3/4 inch. So we would need and then that's just part of the calculation, but.
No, oh yeah, Tom, absolutely, and it may encourage some of the smaller houses, to go down to a 3/4 just for that reason. But I think from a comparative standpoint, let's compare 1 inch to 1 inch,
Right.
and then the full price to full price, and the 50% to the 50%.
And then we'll have to have a separate number and possibly for 3/4 inch is what we're saying, correct?
we can't.
Yes, you would have in the chart.
In the final fee chart, but yeah, that all makes sense, John and Mike and everybody, yeah.
Okay.
I think, one other thing that, when we're talking about different aspects of the, fees and such like that, as we talk about, say, reductions for residential, I don't know if the committee has, thoughts on infill versus that type of thing, where you may have some vacant lots and whether those would be something you wanted to encourage for low income housing and those types of things. But that's just something that I've heard too. But anyway.
Yeah, Tom, that's an excellent question, and I appreciate you jogging my memory on that. John and Jeff, if we have, and y'all, John certainly been here in downtown Odessa, there's vacant blocks of land. Would you charge impact fees even though it's going into an old area that has streets and water lines already in place? They're just vacant property. So yeah, I think what Tom Kerr's saying, does that get treated the same as a new D.R. Horton subdivision?
Yeah, legally, yes, it would, because if a building came in, now I'll give you two scenarios. If it's been vacant forever and never has put that piece of property has never put any kind of infrastructure burden on the city, you would charge them according to the study and the law. You can choose not to. Like City of Denton, for example, has broken out their what they call their central business district, and they don't charge, or it's a lower charge. If a building was on that tract of land at one time and used a 3/4 inch meter, and you're gonna put a new building there and they're gonna use a 3/4 inch meter again, then no, you wouldn't charge them for that water service and or sewer service.
You're not allowed to, or you don't have to?
You don't have to. I think you could argue both cases of whether you're allowed to or not.
Okay.
What I would recommend is we define that exact question in the ordinance. So
Yeah.
what a lot of ordinance will say is it will give you criteria. If you demolish a building, it'll say if you have an existing vacant building, how to handle it. There's some good language and some ordinances we can share with you, but a lot of it is like Lubbock has pretty good ordinance on their roadway impact fee that says if it's an existing building that you're not demolishing it and you're just repurposing it, there's no impact fee charged. If you demolish it, then they figure out whether an impact fee is charged, or if it was a vacant land that's been vacant for more than I think 2 years or 3 years, like someone demolished it years ago, then they charge it. So, but you could define those questions in the ordinance, and I would encourage it to do so that everyone's treated fairly and equally. But as John's point is, if in an infill development, you could also say like, here's the boundary. In Lubbock, for example, just because it's the nearest by neighbor that did it, is they actually had a service area that pretty much covered their downtown. And in that service area in downtown, they do not charge an impact fee.
Okay.
So
I think, Jimmy, we would want to probably look at something like that, because I know there's been, in council's past, there's been an appetite for infill. We have so much vacant
Most
stuff.
definitely.
Yeah.
We're also avoiding the elephant in the room. Not three of us are kind of avoiding it, not meaning to, but our drill sites would have to be addressed in a different way too, I think. If we get them released and we can develop them to a point, how do we look at those?
I think that's an excellent item to put into that discussion of the ordinance.
So-
there.
So, Dr. Goetz, we've always kind of struggled with that question, not just so much on the drill sites, but I think they could be viewed the same. So much of our effort is certainly within the last 10 years has been more of a focus on redevelopment as opposed to development, because development, let's face it, oftentimes it's going to occur on its own. Where we struggle and where we have difficulty is developing our older areas of town. Maybe we need to treat, as a committee, we need to look at treating impact fees as a redevelopment tool, if you will, to get people back into some of our older areas of our community. Many of those areas still have large swaths of land that are vacant and have always been vacant. That may include some of the drill sites, but some of it doesn't include drill sites. But maybe that's an incentive that we, through this process, that we either reduce that even further if you're in certain segments of the community, such as downtown or South Odessa, where it now becomes an attraction to a developer because the fees are less, and therefore maybe becoming a redevelopment tool for us to use to maybe promote housing in those areas that haven't seen new housing in some time.
Michael, you're reading my mind. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, to keep this moving along, are there any other questions of Kimley Horn folks? Hearing none, let John, April, and Jeff, if y'all will kind of put together those charts that we discussed and send them to the city, and they'll distribute them to us, and let's don't wait till the next meeting to get those. I think us having those and being able to look at that will be insightful.
Hey,
for
John,
us.
can we ask you a clarification question? Do you want us to send you the same
Yeah.
examples, like the single family, the multifamily, the industrial and office that we did last time for those examples?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Because all that's going to come up in the discussion that we're getting ready to talk about with our development community.
Perfect.
Okay.
I'll get those your way.
Great.
And there's kind of two sets. There's a 100% set and a 50%.
Yes.
If you will.
In comparison to Midland with their 4 districts and our 3.
Right.
Right.
John,
Be
we're-
sure and attach, I'm sorry, be sure and attach the Midland map and the Odessa map so we can remember where those areas are.
Just in case, if you look at the Midland map, you get confused. There's 5 areas in Midland, but one of them doesn't have an impact fee. It's the airport. So don't, if you look at the map, don't get confused. There's only 4, but the map will show 5.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, Vanessa, I apologize.
no, not a problem. I just wanted to clarify, just, I guess to sum up what we owe you is we want a 1-inch meter comparison to Midland at 100%, a 1-inch meter comparison to Midland at 50%. And then would you like us to also propose options where the city may be a certain percentage below Midland on those as well, so that we can fluctuate those numbers, whether it be 100% water and wastewater, and then fluctuate the service area on roadway, but still giving us less than Midland?
I think that's too many options right now. I think if we compare it, my thought is, and I'll let the rest of the committee think, if we just look at 100% and 50% and compare to Midland, then we can figure out if we need to adjust those percentages, and it might be 6 or 12% or something. Wouldn't necessarily be the 10. So let's just look at those base numbers, and then the next time we get together, we can then talk about scaling those down, and April probably can just change a few little numbers for us on her spreadsheet at that point.
But Vanessa, I like your thinking, Vanessa, because that's exactly what I was thinking, because we're going to eventually have to do that. But this
Right.
time, just like John said, but I think you can go ahead and calculate it, because I'll guarantee you we're going to ask you for them.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Good.
Now, on item number 4, discuss and formulate a written recommendation to the council on the impact fees. My personal opinion, and based on the conversations I've had with several members of this group, and then with the discussion that city manager and I had last night at the city council, I don't think we're ready to formulate a written recommendation at this time. Is there any, everybody agree with that on the committee?
I
Yes.
agree.
I agree.
I agree.
All right, thank you. Let's go to
Do you want to go ahead and just ask for a motion to table that?
you're right. Thank you for keeping me online.
So moved.
Got a move from Dr. Goetz. Is there a second? Second. All right.
Second.
Joe Hurt, second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We'll table that for a future meeting. Next item, discuss, question, comments. Numerous members of the committee and our city council members individually, and then have asked, have we had, or were we going to get the stakeholders, the developers, the builders, interested people involved in this and get their input? We Michael and I committed to the city council that we were going to discuss that today, and that in all likelihood, we would be setting that meeting. The city council has set a public hearing, refresh my memory, April the 12th, I believe, for
I believe it's
public-
April 13th.
Thank you, Vanessa. April the 13th for the public to have input on the land use plan and the capital improvements plan. Nothing about impact fees at that time. That'll be a future public hearing. And I felt it best, rather than the developers hear about that, read about that, that we may get the stakeholders and offer them impact fees 101, if you will, and discuss and look at some of these issues that we've all been talking about and get their input. And I have already started just visiting with some of my clients about what's going on. They've asked those questions, but I think it's fair that we should do that for everybody.
John, if I may. Thanks for that. John is correct. I've certainly had a lot of questions from our city council about stakeholders and when are we going to talk to those folks. I think what's important for us to discuss today is when is the appropriate time and what are the appropriate topics. Obviously, you as a committee have not come up with a recommendation on what the fee is. We still need a little bit of work on that. And then understanding that most of those guys they're probably going to be okay with the land use assumption. They're probably going to be okay with the capital improvements. Where I think we're really going to get questions is about the fee, and I don't know if we've made that decision just yet. So as we think about,
Michael, let somebody to mute their deal.
Jimmy, is that better? Can everybody hear me?
I muted everyone, Michael, so I think only you can talk right now.
Okay, great. No one can respond. As I was saying, the city council did give me direction, gave Mr. Landgraf direction that we should be discussing impact fees with the stakeholders. I think what's important to remember is what is the best timing for that, because I think most of those guys, I think they're going to be by and large fine with the land use assumption. They're going to be fine with the capital improvements. What they really want to know is what is that fee? And I don't think, again, this group hasn't made that decision just yet. So as we think about when we want to meet with them and what we want to discuss, we need to have that in our mind, that some of this stuff we're still kind of working through. But no question, we need to meet with those folks. It's important, I know, to all of you, and it's important to us and the city council. So as we think about when we might want to do that, let's not forget about those things. Thanks.
And just to echo on what Michael was saying, I do want to just remind everyone that we do have 2 public hearings that are statutorily required. Again, this one is just for the land use assumption and impact BCIP, which I know John Landgraf, you mentioned to council yesterday, and I think you mentioned accurately that these are all based off of prior master plans that the city council and the city has worked on and adopted. And we'll have another public hearing later on down the line to specifically discuss the impact fee that has been recommended by the committee to the council. And so there is still that other time frame that we have. So we still do have time to discuss with the stakeholders and the developers.
And remind me, Vanessa or Michael or Tom, I can't remember, did council request a workshop before the next public hearing? Because that could be an opportunity to make sure that the development communities kind of heard the workshop from land use and CIP. I don't recall.
Yes, I do believe that they are requesting a work session over more in-depth on the land use assumption and impact BCIP.
So that might be a section, if they want to know more about the land use and CIP, depending on what this committee says, there's another opportunity for people to learn about just that specific technical topic.
Yeah, would that be the appropriate time? It seems to me that it might be that we invite the development community to that workshop and of course have to get council's concurrence, but they seem to be interested in having the development community. Invite them to that April 6th workshop and expand it to include the development community, and then Kimley Horn could do the more or less the basics for the stakeholders and refresh the council's memory on that. And then I think it would be good. They and we would hear their input, and then that still gives us plenty of time for the other public hearings.
John, I think that's fine as long as we remember we've got to confine the input only as it relates to the land use and the CIP. But if that's all the discussion that we're going to have, I think that works. We can certainly fit that into the work session.
Well, Michael, I think it needs to be a little bit more than that, in that it needs to be kind of the impact fee 101.
Okay.
For the development community. I mean, because some of those guys, the Beaton Bows and the D.R. Hortons understand that, but I don't think the Larry Bells and the Silverleaf and John Burnett's and those kind of guys do, because they haven't been in places where that's been done very much.
John, I agree with you. They need to have the basics. I guess what I was concerned about is not delving into the actual fee part, because we're not there yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I don't want to get in there and start talking about Midland's 5,000 and we want to be 4,800 or 6,000 or whatever. Yes, you're exactly right. But I would like for those guys to understand why and how we're coming to this, and that this is just a tool in the city council's toolbox. And, but the council is ultimately the one that's going to decide, but we're going to be making some recommendations to them, but want them to understand how we're getting from point A to point B.
Hey, John, I think if they want to have like a lot of questions and answers, like a dialogue, it might be better to have a separate time than a council work session. I'll leave that to Michael, but like, I think a lot of the council work session is dialogue between council. I feel like I don't know how much typical dialogue between non-council and stuff occurs during a work session. So it depends. We're open to whatever the city wants to do, but if you think there's gonna be a lot of questions from those developers, we want to be able to answer their questions as well.
Jeff, and we typically utilize work sessions to have interactions with the public. So yeah.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure.
Michael, and we'll get the committee to vote on this, but if you think that's workable and you can run that by the mayor and the council to let us impede upon that time, we would like to get an invitation out to our development community. And I think we've sent emails and things to them. Mr. Kerr's had meetings with them, and we've had some other get-togethers, so we know all who I think we're targeting there.
I think for that day, we should be good. We've got some other big ticket items, John, that are going to take a lot of time, but I'm not seeing one of those big ticket items for that particular date. I always worry about keeping them till 10 o'clock at night, like we used to. Remember that, Jimmy? But I think that date looks fairly good in terms of items that may be presented to them.
Okay, good. Does the committee think that's a good thing to do, right time to do it, and would like to move forward? Do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second. I think it's good.
Okay. It's been moved. Withrow, seconded Hurt. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, good. Let's put that in motion then. Are there any other topics, comments, questions that we need to talk about as a committee while we've got the experts and the management and staff with us today? Michael, anything you want to add? Tom, anything you want to add?
No, I think we've got marching orders from you guys in terms of getting additional data, and we'll get that, work with Kim before we get that prepared and sent back to you guys as soon as possible.
Okay. Thank you. I think we accomplished a lot. We're moving forward, maybe not as fast as the original schedule, but I feel like we're being pertinent on the things that we're asking about. So I don't feel too bad about stretching this out a little bit. I'd rather get all the answers and get it right than hurry through this process. So I appreciate everybody's input and participation, and I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
John, this Tom, I just wanted to, as an informational basis, we will be posting that meeting on Friday in the newspaper for the public hearing that'll be coming up on land use and CIP.
Yeah.
And I just wanted, if somebody calls with questions or anything, the verbiage is statutory, and but it doesn't mention impact fee, but it's saying possible and may, right? And so if somebody's asking, we're not obviously doing anything on impact fees. I just want to make that clear so everybody.
Yeah. The public hearing is clearly just on there it is right there. It is for the land use assumptions and the capital improvement plan. And that's what we're asking the council to adopt, and they're having a public hearing, which ultimately could lead or possible lead to the implementation of water, wastewater, and road impact fees. But we're not adopting any impact fees or discussing the impact fees at that public hearing. Yeah, make sure everybody understands that, because you guys will probably start getting some calls. Okay, thanks, Tom, for making that clear. Hearing nothing else, we will be adjourned. Look forward to getting that information. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.